Hi and welcome to my channel. I know I've made my last dozen videos at my desk, but this morning I was sitting in my recliner because I wanted to finish a book, a really good book that I started well over a week ago, but I stopped to read a different book, finished that book, and then went back to this one. So as soon as I finished the book, I looked at the calendar and I realized, today is the 17th, so I should make a mid-month video. Now, let me tell you, this is my worst month in well over 2 going on 3 years of reading. And it is what it is. I am not shy to tell you that I have bipolar disorder. I also have PTSD and major depression, anxiety, and because of triggers, I have night terrors. And with all of that combined right now, I have read 16 books for the month of October thus far. Now, to some readers, 16 books is a huge number because some people might only get to read 1 book a month. But for me, I have been reading 2 to 2.4 books a day for more than a couple of years. So that's why I say this is a low month for me. But I decided to at least make this, I just had coffee, so I've got a wee bit of indigestion, so forgive me for that, please. So I thought I would make this mid-month video. Now, I haven't made my weekly reads video for a couple of weeks, and the reason for that simply is because of the depression. But if you bear with me, I will tell you just a wee bit about the books that I've read during the month of October. And from looking at my spreadsheet, which I printed a page for these reads here, I've only written maybe 6 or so reviews from this stack. I said stash. From this stack, I've only written a half dozen reviews. So let's just get right into it. The first book that I read in October was If Every Day Was Christmas by Donna Ashcroft. Now, I have read maybe a half dozen of her books thus far, or close to that. So I know that every book by her, which is generally a women's fiction / romance, is always going to be a touching read. It was a really good book. Basically, it was about a woman who's had a year-round Christmas store. A lot of baubles and decorations and things like that. And she loved Christmas. As a matter of fact, during the Christmas season, and no, I did not look up these books to give you the characters' names. I have had a very dark week, so you'll have to bear with me. I will tell you about the books, but I will not be able to tell you the characters' names, and if you want to make that a strike against me, go right ahead. In any event, she loved Christmas, and she had the store, and not only did she have the store that she kept going year-round, but every Christmas season she would dress up as an elf and further extend her joy of Christmas. Well, one day while going from one point A to point B, she spots somebody that was stranded on the road. I believe he had a flat tire, and when he went to change the flat, his spare was also flat. So he was stranded and he did not have a cell phone signal. Well, she offers him a ride back to an inn or something along that nature, and said that, with the time of day or evening that it was, he wouldn't be able to get his car fixed probably to the next day or the next few days, but she knew that somebody in town would help. Okay, so that's how they met. So he's looking at her and he's struck by her beauty. I think she had green eyes. She was gorgeous, but she was dressed as an elf on a holiday that he hated. So he was pretty much a Scrooge. And so that's how they met. And like I said, it was kind of women's fiction / romance, but more romance. So ultimately, they became a couple, and she found out why he hated Christmas so much. And it just was a very sweet story. I love anything that I read by Donna Ashcroft, and this book was no different. Then I read My Husband's Daughter by Emma Robinson. Now, this book was really, really good because I thought that I was going to read a psychological thriller, because a lot of times when I read a book that had like an ex or a previous relationship, then you have somebody that is trying to damage an existing relationship. But it was nothing like that. Actually, it was it was women's fiction. It was a very, very touching story where a couple who met, well, let me back it up. There was a woman who had several relationships, and her relationships were make or break based on the fact that she did not want children. So when she met her now husband, one of the things that made them work as a couple was the fact that he didn't want children either. So that was great. They were happy. They both had very busy lives, very active in their jobs. Well, one day somebody knocks on their door and she says, "Hi." And he says, "What are you doing here?" And she goes, "Well, this is your daughter." So I believe the little girl was like 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old. And now the main character sees that her husband has a daughter. But wait a minute, they've already decided that they didn't want children. And now has he hidden his daughter from her? Has he hidden a part of his life from her? So as you read this book, the mother of the child has an ultimate plan. So for some reason, I didn't look at the genre. So I thought that she had ulterior motives that were going to be hard on the existing relationship between her ex and his wife. But it was nothing like that. And I don't want to put a spoiler in there. But basically, she had a reason for finding her ex, presenting her daughter or their daughter to him, because something was going on in her life. And it turned out to be a very, very good story. I really loved it, and I've already written the review. I had a blog tour for this, so this review, as a matter of fact, the previous book I mentioned, If Every Day Was Christmas, that review is on my blog, and this review for My Husband's Daughter is also on my blog. Then I read Undercover Bromance by Alyssa K. Adams. This was the first of 3 books that I read by her this month. But I'll tell you about them in order. And this basically was about a group of men who formed a book club to read romance. Why? Because they wanted to fix, repair, or start a romantic relationship of their own. So they figure they would read these romances, which were usually historical romances, and by so doing, they would learn how to manage their love lives. So that was the first book in the series, was Undercover Bromance. And then I read the Bromance Book Club, the second book in the series. Now, the difference between book 1 and book 2 is book 1 was basically about the group and then a singular relationship that you had 2 primary protagonists. But in that book, there were snippets of the romance that they were reading in the book club. In book number 2, the Bromance Book Club, they did not have the snippets of the romance that was being read. But again, it was a singular couple that were forming a relationship, and the man in the relationship was using the lessons that he learned in the book to help guide the relationship that he was in. There's a lot of humor, a lot of sensuality, and a lot of warm-hearted warm-hearted feelings that I got from reading that book. Then I read The Survivors by Jane Harper. I did not like this book. Now, The Survivors was the only audiobook that I read during this month, I believe. I think everything else was an ebook. The Survivors, I think I got to 30% or so, because I also had it as an ebook, which is where I can tell you pretty much how far I got. I had to go back and start it from the beginning. Basically, there was a murder A man was on vacation with his girlfriend and their infant son. A murder happens, and everybody in town thought he was the guilty party. And so I was trying to kind of ascertain as to why he was, all fingers were pointing at him. And I couldn't quite grasp as to why. No, I have not yet written the review, and I don't know quite what I will say in the review. But this book probably would get 2 stars from me. Now, I'm also trying to read Janet Ivanovich's Stephanie Plum series. I believe there's 26 books or so at this point. A new one just came out or is coming out. So I read Hot 6. I'm only able to squeeze in 1 or 2 books a month. So this was the 6th book I read. And Stephanie is now at a crossroads in her romantic life. So there's Joe and there's Granger. So for some reason I remember their names. So that was Hot 6, a great read. It's fun. It's funny. It's kind of like a cozy mystery, but there's a little heat, so it's more like a mystery to me. Then I read Under a Sky on Fire by Suzanne Kelman. Again, this is one where the review is on my blog. This was a really, really touching story. It started off as a family in Poland, a Jewish family who were driven out of their home by Hitler and his goons. And it got very, very, very dark for them. And there was a moment in the beginning part of the story, and I'm not using any notes, so I'm making sure I get my facts straight, where before things got really hanky with Hitler, a family, a father and a mother and 2 daughters, maybe even 3 daughters, but the 2 daughters in particular, the parents wanted the older daughter, they were only a year apart, to marry a young man. Well, as it turned out, the young man liked the younger daughter, and so this caused a parting of the ways for the 2 sisters. The older daughter went off to America, and the younger daughter stayed in Poland and married the young man. The girl, her name was Mira, Meara, and she married the young man, and they had a daughter. But again, Hitler was on scene, maybe not actually in Poland, but he was trying to get rid of as many Jews as possible. So they were driven from their homes. They ended up in the Jewish ghetto, and they lived a very, very hard life until the point when Hitler started exterminating them by the dozens, hundreds, or thousands, okay? And as we know, eventually millions. So the girl that married Avram, was the man that she married, was the only one left of her family in that area. So she lost Avram, she lost her daughter, and she goes to America. Now, those might seem like spoilers, but they're really not, because it was kind of like the first part of her life. And then the second part of her life is now she's in America, and she's near her sister, but they're still not close because of the whole confusion about who was going to marry the young man. But her sister is now married with her own children, and she takes on this job, she takes on that job, and she was a survivor. And it was the fact that she was a survivor that created the second part of the book. Meanwhile, she meets someone named Max. Why am I remembering all the details of this book? I have no idea. But she met someone like Max, and there might have been a glimmer of hope that her life could start over again. And this book was so incredibly touching, because I have a hard time understanding sometimes, as many books as I read, how someone could come from such tragedy, from such darkness, and start their lives over again. And this book was written so well. As a matter of fact, even when I posted my review on Instagram, the author, Suzanne Kelman, commented on my review. So I think I did a good job at expressing how deeply touched I was by this book. Then I read Christmas at Fireside Cabins by Jenny Hale. Now, Jenny Hale is a very, very effective romance writer. As a matter of fact, I think 2 or 3 of her movies have been on the I think it's Lifetime. She's had movies made of her books. So this book was nothing less than wonderful. It was obviously a romance, a touch of women's fiction in there. And it was about, I think there was 4 girls, 3 or 4 girls, young women who took a vacation. And when they went on vacation, one of the girls knew she was going to have a hard time with the Christmas season, because that was around the time her father died. So every time Christmas rolled around, she was quite devastated and quite hurt at the loss of her father. So going on vacation with her friends was a way for her to deal with being around the holiday without being so heartbroken. Well, when they get to the cabin that they're going to, as lovely as, I believe it was in the Tennessee Hills, as lovely as it was, there was many parts of it where the cabin was broken down. So the other ladies go back to their homes and to their jobs, and she took kind of a leave from her job and stuck around. And the reason why is because the owner of the cabin, the girl, by the way, her name I believe was Lila. The owner of the cabin, her name was Eleanor. She really touched this other young woman's life, and now she wanted to help this lady Eleanor. Meanwhile, she met somebody there, I believe his name was Theo, and there was a chance that the two of them could have had some type of a relationship. And Theo owned a coffee shop, a no-name coffee shop. And so the story kind of shifts. On the one hand, she's trying to help the lady that owned the cabin or the resort and maybe restore it to its former glory. But at the same time, she was drawn to Theo, who was secretive. There was something about his life that he was holding back. His name might not have even been Theo. I'm thinking right now, and I'm not quite clear on whether or not that was his name. But he had a dark secret that he was hiding. And so the story was kind of a split between restoring that resort and her possibly falling in or developing feelings for this young man, and as to why the coffee shop had no name. And so there was a little bit of mystery in there. So it was about love and kindness and friendship and mystery. It was really, really a good story. I just put that review on my blog maybe today or yesterday, I'm not quite sure. Then I read a science fiction book, which was The Mirror Man by Jane Gilmartin. I loved this book. First of all, I don't read much science fiction. Maybe this might be my 4th in over 550 or 60 books for this year, but I'm trying to read more science fiction. And this was not only science fiction, but it was also mystery. And The Mirror Man basically was a man who was offered $10 million if he would allow himself to be cloned. And if he, in the process of this cloning, his clone would live with his wife and his son for 1 year. And the man himself had to watch the interaction between the clone and his family for a minimum of 6 hours a day by closed circuit TV. There were a lot of rules, but he had to live apart from his family, keep it, gun-ho secret. There was no way that anybody could know that this cloning had taken place. Well, in the process of this cloning, where it became a mystery was if certain things happened, lives were snuffed out. And that was where it was a heavy mystery along the lines of science fiction. I thought it was an excellent book. I believe I gave it 5 stars, but I haven't quite written a review yet. Then I read Rescue You by Alicia Whistler. I hope I pronounced her name correctly. Now, Rescue You was pretty much about a bunch of puppy mills where people were trying to shut down the puppy mills and save the dogs. So that's where Rescue You came along. Along the way, there were a few, maybe 2 to 3 love stories. And I kind of found that out of place. I don't think I've written this review yet either. I can't quite remember. But I kind of found that a little bit out of place. I liked the part where they were rescuing the dogs. I loved that, but I wasn't too fond of. I had no problem with the relationships, because of course people fall into relationships, but there was a little bit of an imbalance in this, so I think I gave this one 3 stars. Then I read a K.L. Slater book, which was The Girl She Wanted. Kim Slater is a great writer. I think I've read a half dozen of her books. This was a psychological thriller. It was a good book. I won't really give you a summary of it because I haven't written the review. I haven't really even thought much about this book, because this is kind of when I went into my depression, so I kind of have to refresh myself for The Girl She Wanted. But I do remember giving this book 4 stars on Goodreads. Then I read Saving Grace by D.M. Barr. Now, Saving Grace, maybe 3 stars. Now, this one I remember very clearly. It was about a woman who was very unhappily married. Her father was richer than rich, and if he died, she would basically become a millionaire. Along the way, however, she realizes or believes that if her father, who had just recently succumbed to Alzheimer's or symptoms of Alzheimer's, I'm not saying it correctly, if he did die, she felt that her husband would snuff her out, would kill her, or make sure that she would never see a penny of her inheritance. So she comes up with a plan to expose her husband, who basically, and by the way, this book gave me feelings of Gaslight. I think Edward Burrows was in that movie. It gave me feelings of the movie Gaslight. So she was gaslighted by her husband. And prior to that, she was gaslighted by her father. So as a teenager, something happened, and I won't tell you because that would be a spoiler. Something happened where her father decided that she was mentally ill. Do you get what I said? Her father decided she was mentally ill. So she started a life of of being treated on a psychological level by hospitalizations and psychiatrists and medication, all triggered by her father. So when she married her husband, this whole pattern of her being mentally ill or broken started. So this whole idea that I kept feeling that this was a big, huge gaslighting situation was going on. So she, however, was not who her husband and father portrayed her to be. So she came up with a plan to expose her husband, and hopefully if she could execute her plan in time, she wouldn't lose her life at the hands of her husband. I have indigestion, as I said earlier. So that was Saving Grace. It was a really, really pretty good book. I'm only really going to go 3.5 stars, but it was a pretty good book. Then I read a historical thriller. It was, historical fiction along the lines of Regency it was called The Light at Windcliff by Sarah E. Ladd. It was really a good book, a good 4-star book. And basically it was a situation where something was going on that affected the lives of people in this time, and lives were lost. Some of it was on land, some of it was at sea, and it was a combination of historical fiction and mystery. I'm being rather vague because I have not yet written the review. So again, I'm reading these last couple of books that I'm talking about here when I was in the throes of a dark place. So I kind of have to refresh myself a little bit on that one. Now the next one, maybe because I like the author, Helena Dixon, and it's the 3rd or 4th book in the series, Murder on the Dance Floor. This was a cozy mystery. I have read the previous books in the series, and along the line of this series, a slow but sure romance is brewing. But it started off with a woman who was living at her aunt's hotel, and whether she was at her aunt's hotel or going to the opera, going here or going there, there was also a murder. So now in this book, there's another murder, or not so much a murder, but maybe a missing person. And she decides, of course, that she's going to investigate it. Meanwhile, her intended is always by her side while she's solving these little crimes. Not little crimes, because obviously murder's in the title. So that was a great little story. I loved it, and I will continue reading this series every time a book comes out in it. My next book was the third book in that bromance series by Lyssa Kay Adams, and this was Crazy Stupid Bromance, and I loved this one just like I loved the first two, and it was along the same line. Now, the bromance book club had existed, and there was a guy, he's like, I'm not joining this book club, are you serious? But then he started being drawn to someone, and he couldn't quite get the relationship off of its feet, so he joined the book club. And so that romance brewed, and it was a cute story just like the first two were, and I really liked it. Now this one that I'm about to mention, Where Butterflies Go, I can easily talk about this book, but I won't, because I'm going to stop and do a video book review of this book, because it was such a good book, such a good book. It was a historical fiction, and it was a heartbreaking story. But like I said, I want to do a video review of this book, so I really won't tell you about it in this review. In this video. The last book that I read that I'll talk about here is The Heart Goes On by Kate Hewitt. It's the first book in a trilogy. The other two books are Her Rebel Heart and The Fragile Heart. In this book, basically, it was about a family in Scotland, or a girl in Scotland, whose beloved and his family were heading to the New World in America or Canada, in the Americas, but they ended up in Canada. And it was very, very, early settlers. So we're talking, when the borders weren't fully formed. So that's why it was called the Americas, because Canada is part of North America. Well, in any event, he says to her, I can't make you wait for me, but if you'll wait for me, I promise one day I will send for you or come back for you. Meanwhile, the young lady, her family was just about to lose their farm. Hills, I think the name of the farm, their land was called. And so she is trying to protect her family. Her father had fallen ill, and now she's with her sister, and her cousin is there. Her two cousins are there, or distant cousins, and now she's trying to save her family. So meanwhile, her beloved is gone. She's trying to hold on to the promise that one day they'll be together, but she's about to lose her land, so she almost makes a devastating choice in order to save her family home. And that was the first part of the, maybe 65 to 75% of the story. And then the remainder of the story was her eventually finding the man that she almost became betrothed to before him and his family sailed away. They were separated by thousands of miles, and everything, all traveling was done by boats, and all mail was done by boats. So whenever the ocean was frozen, mail couldn't get through. So there was a huge lack of communication. And the story was very, very warm-hearted. I loved it, and I'm really eager to read the next one, which I mentioned is Her Rebel Heart. It's about the McDougal and the McDougal and the Campbell families. And I really loved it. It's by Kate Hewitt. It's not like when I read Kate Hewitt's books, they're more women's fiction. And they're always about a child, a missing child, or you know, they're a different flavor. This book and this series is historical fiction, so it's really nice to read an author that I like and read a different genre that the author wrote. So that's the first book of that series, and so in my next video, hopefully when I do a wrap up, I will have read the next 2 books. So that's it. I'm going to edit this video, include all of the book covers, but I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for letting me talk about these books with you, and I ask you in advance to forgive me for not remembering all of the details. I dealt with a lot of cloudiness because of the stress and depression that I'm under, but I wanted to at least do this wrap-up video, and I will make a couple of book review videos. I think I definitely want to make a book review video of Where Butterflies Go, and of a book that I read back in September, which is First Date by Sue Watson. I think I'd like to make those as video reviews, and maybe My Husband's Daughter. So there's a few video reviews that you have to look forward to on this channel, as well as the diamond painting and the coloring, the jigsaw puzzles, and all that other fun stuff. So thank you and goodbye.